Welcome, everyone. My name is Alanis Ortiz-Espinoza. I'm a board member at Equal Voice and one of your co-hosts for today.
Bonjour à tous, mon nom est Jenny Gaspard, je suis membre du conseil d'administration à voix égales pour le Québec et une de vos co-animatrices pour aujourd'hui.
Today's event will be in both official languages and live streamed in French on our Facebook page at Equal Voice CA and in English on our YouTube channel. Our hashtag for social media is 100 on the hill, so don't forget to tag us. And for translation, please find the devices at the back of the room.
L'événement d'aujourd'hui se déroulera dans les deux langues officielles et sera transmis sur nos pages Facebook Equal Voice CA et en anglais sur YouTube. N'oubliez pas de nous taguer et d'utiliser 100 ans sur la colline. Pour la traduction, veuillez trouver les appareils au fond de la salle.
And before we begin, we want to acknowledge how fortunate we are to be able to meet in person today, but it is very important to be respectful of COVID protocols. This means please wear your masks at all times except when eating or drinking, and we request any food or beverages to be consumed at your table, and of course for everyone to practice social distancing.
Avant de commencer, nous voulons reconnaître la chance que nous avons de pouvoir nous rencontrer en personne aujourd'hui, mais il est très important de respecter les protocoles du COVID. Cela signifie que vous êtes priés de porter vos masques en tout moment, sauf lorsque vous mangez ou vous buvez, et nous vous demandons de consommer toute nourriture, boisson à votre table et de pratiquer la distanciation sociale. Avant de commencer, j'aimerais présenter Shirley Tolley. Shirley est la représentante des femmes du conseil tribal de la nation algonquine Anishinaabe. Shirley est fière membre de la communauté algonquine Kitigan Sibi Anishinabeg. Shirley réside dans la région de Gatineau, au cœur du territoire non cédé des Algonquins, où ses ancêtres chassaient, voyageaient et commerçaient le long de la Kitishibi, la rivière des Outaouais. Shirley est également une survivante de l'école fédérale de jour indienne et connaît bien les protocoles culturels et traditionnels. Elle est également une activiste et a participé à de nombreuses batailles, en particulier lorsqu'elle était sur le marché du travail. Aujourd'hui, elle continue à travailler sans relâche pour s'engager à faire progresser les conditions sociales et économiques et de toutes les femmes dans la nation algonquine. Donc, accueillons chaleureusement Madame Shirley Tolley.
Kwe Kichimigwech Kibijayang, Kakina, Shirley Tolley Nidishnikas, Kirigan Zibi Nindonjiba. Nous sommes réunis ici aujourd'hui sur le territoire algonquin non cédé de la nation Anishinaabe. Ottawa, la capitale du Canada, est située au cœur du territoire de mes ancêtres qui ont chassé, voyagé et échangé leurs marchandises le long de la rivière Kichisibi. C'est aussi le territoire de mes parents, mes grands-parents et de toutes les futures générations de mon peuple. I am the elected women's representative for the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation Tribal Council, which is a political position. I am very honored to be here today to celebrate with you the 100th anniversary of the first woman, Agnes MacPhail, to be elected to the House of Commons in 1921. And to all the women who followed in her footsteps. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this territory and to say Pichijageg and Bienvenue to the Right Honourable Kim Campbell, the Honourable Jean Augustine, the Honourable Eleni Bakopanos, Nancy Karetak-Lindell, the first Inuk woman elected, Ève-Mary Thaï Thi Lac, the first Vietnamese Canadian woman elected, and Lauren Lee Lu, the youngest woman elected to federal parliament. To the distinguished and invited guests, to the family and friends, and of course, all the staff of Equal Voice. Women are the life givers. Nous avons la capacité naturelle de prendre soin les uns des autres et de nous nourrir les unes des autres. Et le peuple Anishinaabe est né avec la responsabilité d'être les gardiens de la terre. Since our women are life givers, we are also water protectors as water gives us life. Traditionally, when it comes to decision-making within the community, the women were consulted because we brought an empathetic perspective and were always mindful of the generations to come and the family's overall community well-being. We as women all have an important role to play. With that being said, this is why I feel it is so important for women to be involved in politics, which is today's decision-making environment. I would like to take this time to mention that at the highest political level of my people, Roseanne Archibald serves as the first woman to be elected as National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations. And of course, we have Mary May Simon, who's serving as the first Indigenous Governor General. It has been said that one of the best ways to predict the future is to help shape it. And we have that responsibility. So today, let's celebrate the women who have broken barriers and glass ceilings at the political level, and we must continue to serve as role models for our future young women. Kichimigwech, Algomzin, Kakina, and again, welcome to my territory.
Thank you, Shirley. And with that, a message from Equal Voice. Equal Voice acknowledges that our offices are located on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. Their territories and protocols continue to nurture this territory. Equal Voice acknowledges the ongoing oppression of lands, cultures, and the original peoples in what we now know as Canada, and commits to the healing and decolonizing journey we all share together. Equal Voice recognizes that it works within Canada's colonial political institutions, and that by encouraging Indigenous women and gender-diverse people to seek political office, we hope to contribute to the indigenizing of those systems. We are committed to decolonization through the process of reconciliation and support realizing the nation-to-nation relationships.
À voix égale reconnaît que ces bureaux sont situés sur le territoire non cédé et non soumis de la nation algonquine Anishinaabe. Leurs traditions et protocoles continuent de nourrir ce territoire. À voix égale reconnaît l'oppression continue des terres, des cultures et des peuples d'origine dans ce que nous appelons aujourd'hui le Canada et s'engage à travailler à la guérison et la décolonisation avec la société dans son ensemble. À voix égale reconnaît qu'elle travaille au sein des institutions politiques coloniales du Canada et qu'en encourageant les femmes autochtones et les personnes de genre divers à se présenter aux élections. Elle espère contribuer à l'autochtonisation de ces systèmes. L'organisation s'engage à la décolonisation par le biais du processus de réconciliation et supporte les relations de nation à nation.
And on that point, representation matters in politics, and that's what Equal Voice is all about. We are a national organization that works to elect more women at all levels of government in Canada, and today marks 100 years since the first woman was elected in the House of Commons in 1921. And after the 2021 federal election, we have the highest proportion of women MPs ever, but it is still only 30%. And women with intersectional identities, including women of color, Indigenous women, 2S LGBTQ+ women, and women with disabilities are underrepresented. We are making progress, but we still have a long way to go.
La représentation compte en politique. C'est la raison d'être de la voix égale. Nous sommes une organisation nationale qui travaille à faire élire plus de femmes à tous les niveaux du gouvernement du Canada. Aujourd'hui, cela fait 100 ans que la première femme a été élue à la Chambre des communes en 1921. Après l'élection fédérale de 2021, nous avons la plus forte proportion de femmes députées et de tous les temps, mais ce n'est encore que 30%. Et les femmes sont aux identités intersélectionnelles, notamment les femmes de couleur, les femmes autochtones, les femmes 2S LGBTQ+, et les femmes handicapées sont sous-représentées. Il y a certes du progrès, mais nous avons encore beaucoup de chemin à parcourir.
Today, we are joined by some of the trailblazing women who have broken through barriers over the last 100 years and not only opened the door, but held it open for others. We can't wait to hear from them.
Aujourd'hui, nous célébrons certaines de ces femmes pionnières qui ont franchi les barrières au cours des 100 dernières années et qui nous ont non seulement ouvert la porte, mais l'ont aussi maintenue ouverte pour les autres. Nous sommes impatients de les entendre. Avant, nous aimerions remercier le gouvernement du Canada d'avoir rendu cet événement possible. Merci.
And with that, we will now move into our first session that will take place in English. So please grab your translation device if you haven't already. Moderating our panels today will be former delegates from Equal Voices Daughters of the Vote program, also known as DOV. DOV is Equal Voices' flagship program that brings 338 young women and gender-diverse youth to Ottawa for a political leadership summit. Delegates apply through an open call for applications and are selected to take their respective MP seat in the House of Commons. In this past March, I had the honor of representing my home riding, Brampton Centre, in the House of Commons, and I got to meet all the wonderful delegates and learn from the senators, members of parliament, and federal party leaders. Outside this room, you will also see some of the incredible advocacy projects past DOV delegates have completed in their communities, thanks to the Rosemary Spears Leadership Grant. So make sure to check out their booths during the break to learn more from the next generation of changemakers. And now I am pleased to introduce our first moderator, Bibi Salima Hakim, former DOV delegate, multiple award winner including the Duke of Edinburgh's Gold Award, and mental health advocate. Bibi is the founder of Project Breaking Barriers, an initiative she started to raise awareness for mental health. Her policy proposal found its way into the government's platform, Speech from the Throne, and awaits to be debated into the chamber. Her aspiration is to be a member of parliament and the first elected woman of color to be Canada's Prime Minister. Welcome, Bibi.
Thank you, Alana. It's truly an honor to be here with all of you, and it feels just like yesterday that we were all taking our seats into the chamber. I want to take a moment to thank my home MP, Kirsty Duncan, and my current employer, Ikwandrika, here for supporting me and for supporting me at this event today. I am incredibly honored to introduce the Right Honourable Kim Campbell. Not only does she hold the distinction of being Canada's first and only woman Prime Minister, she is also the first Canadian Prime Minister to hold office in all three levels of government, the first woman Justice Minister and Attorney General in Canada, the first woman Minister of National Defence of Canada, of any NATO country, and the first woman Minister of Veteran Affairs, and the first woman leader of the PC Party. Please welcome the Right Honourable Kim Campbell.
Is there a pink hat out there?
Thank you so much for being with us here today and for celebrating this milestone event. As someone who aspires to be Prime Minister and walk in your shoes one day, I'm so inspired to be here, so thank you. The first question we have for you is, do you have any initial thoughts about being here and commemorating 100 years since the first woman was elected in the House of Commons?
Well, first of all, I think it's great. And I think it's great that there's so much interest. I'm just sorry that in celebrating this centenary, we aren't also celebrating gender parity in the House of Commons. That would make it even a more delightful occasion. But I think it is important to recognize those who changed people's expectations of who got to do the job of being a member of Parliament. You know, Winston Churchill once said that for all the letters he had after his name, the ones that meant the most to him were MP. And it is a really important role, in particular in these days when democracy is often under threat. So women who are running for office and getting elected as members of Parliament are so important. And to celebrate Agnes MacPhail, when we hear her quotations and even hear her voice in some of the programs that are being done, we realize she could be of today. She is our sister, and we owe her a great debt of gratitude for having the courage to breach that barrier.
So, Ms. Campbell, why did you first get into politics?
Why did I get into politics? I sometimes say it was a recessive gene. Well, you know, it's interesting, and I've often told this story, and forgive me if you've heard it, but both my parents were in uniform in World War II. I was born after World War II, but it was, of course, the major event of the 20th century. And my dad was in the Canadian Army, and my mother horrified her mother by becoming a Wren as soon as women were allowed to enlist in the Navy. She trained as a radio operator and tracked the transmissions of German U-boats, who incidentally came right up off Quebec City in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. So when I grew up, I had pictures on our wall of both my father and my mother in uniform, and the sense that men and women both served. And of course, World War II was something that was spoken about. It was on TV, it was in movies. It was such an extraordinary event that it fascinated me. And when I was young, I wanted to be part of something that would keep that from happening again. And when I was a teenager, I wanted to be the first woman Secretary General of the UN. Because my family weren't particularly political, and it was only as I got a little bit older, I was the first girl to be student council president of my high school. But I don't really connect that to politics in the same sense of government. It certainly showed that I was somebody who, liked to be a leader and liked to organize things. And in fact, recently my colleague Benno Friesen passed away. And Benno Friesen, who was from the Fraser Valley in British Columbia, once said to me in the House of Commons that he thought I was a born leader. And I was somebody who, often wound up, running things or doing things. And maybe that's what led me into politics. But I should say, when I once quoted that comment in a speech at a luncheon in Vancouver, and I said that he'd called me a born leader, the press that were covering it wrote that he had called me a boring leader. So I urge you to enunciate carefully when you're speaking. But I think it was that I never wanted to live a totally self-regarding life. I wanted to live a life that engaged in issues beyond my own life, that engaged in issues that mattered to society, whether it was not allowing World War III to happen, but also gradually realizing that there were issues in the political arena in my own country that really mattered. So it was a gradual thing. And I say this because I think some of you, particularly those of you who've done Daughters of the Vote, you're incredibly inspired and incredibly motivated, and you've had a remarkable opportunity to see what political activity can be. But somebody just greeted me to say that she just started her life as an MP at 68. You don't necessarily have to think when you're young you want to be it. Sometimes people say, well, if you're late coming to the party, well, maybe you're not serious. No. At any time in your life, you may feel the call to get involved in public life. And when you feel the call, respond to it, no matter how old you are. And don't feel that if you didn't think about it when you were young, that your commitment as you get older is less important, because it's not.
Oh, I apologize because I'm tearing up as you're talking, because just the same amount of emotions as you spoke to us in the chamber, I'm feeling that here too. For the young women listening and for the young youth out there listening to the broadcast as well, in your 20 years of being within this field, what is one piece of advice that you would share with a young person who's interested in getting involved, whether if it's locally, provincially, or federally?
Well, the short answer is usually just go for it. Some people say, well, what advice would you give your 20-year-old self? And I say, well, I would give my advice to keep my languages up and my weight down. But I think the important thing is to find your voice. We often recommend that people find a way to be able to be independent. There's a certain time in your life when you're young and single and unencumbered, when it's a good time to get an education. It doesn't mean you can't get it at any time, but there are certain times that are strategically easier to do things and to lay the groundwork for however you will earn your living or become somebody who is not dependent on others. It gives you a certain independence of view. But I think for each person, what I loved about being in Parliament was the different backgrounds of my colleagues and the different interests of their constituents and the different problems. And I came from Vancouver, and I discovered that the issues that people were facing in Atlantic Canada, in Newfoundland and Labrador, in Northern Ontario, in Quebec, on the prairies, that they were all different, and how important it was for me to learn to respect those needs and differences and priorities, and to try and negotiate the recognition of my own interests. So I think that it's very important to find your own voice, but also to be curious about the rest of your country, and to take as many opportunities as you can to learn the other official language, but also to see the rest of the country, because it's actually such a big country. It's a big job to get to know it.
No, I think that's great advice. On the note of advice, there are a few newly elected female MPs that are joining us in the 44th Parliament. And to those MPs, what is one experience that you have in your mind that has stuck out from your career that you would share with them for either a learning lesson of mistakes not to do again or something to look forward to?
Well, because I had served at local and provincial government before I came to Ottawa, I had made all sorts of mistakes before I got here. So I didn't put my foot in my mouth quite so much when I got to Ottawa as I had done before. But I think one of the things that's really important is to respect the knowledge that people have. And I remember when I became a minister and was putting my staff together, because I became a minister quite soon after I was elected to Parliament. And I said, there's only room for one rookie in this office, and I'm it. And I deliberately set out to find people for my staff. And some of them were quite young, but people who had experience on the Hill. And I made a point also of seeking out experienced people. When I became the Minister of State for Indian Affairs, I used to meet every Monday morning. We had 2 deputy ministers in that department, because it was a huge department. And I said to them, will you give me some time every Monday morning just to talk about how things work here? And, where the bodies are buried, and, how people can be effective working here. And when I was then named Minister of Justice, one of the deputies wrote a little note saying, I enjoyed our Monday morning meetings, it sure beat working. But I guess what I'm saying is that understand that there's so much to learn, and don't be afraid to reach out to people who have the knowledge and experience to help you navigate, because when you come here as a member of Parliament, you want to be effective. You want to make a difference for your constituents. You want to be an effective member of a team that has larger goals that are beyond your own riding. And so learning how things work, getting to know your caucus colleagues, and getting to know the people from other parties as well, getting to understand how, what their thinking is and how you can create common cause with them. So curiosity and a bit of humility are important, but at the same time, an enthusiasm and a confidence that if you do the work, you can make a difference, and to take everything that you're assigned to do seriously, committee work, whatever, one of my colleagues, Frank Oberle from Northern BC, used to say that to be a member of Parliament was in many ways like going to the best university in the world, because you could learn anything. The Library of Parliament, there were so many resources that if you were curious about something, you could find things out. And following that curiosity can help you to be an effective member of Parliament and also make the job much more interesting and enjoyable.
Absolutely. We will be taking a couple of questions from the floor, so if anybody has a question, there is a microphone. Does anyone have a question that they would like to ask?
I'm not sure where you go if you have a question. Is there a...
Right there.
Ah, there's a microphone. I'm blind as a bat. There it is.
Good day, and thank you so much for being with us. My question is this: do you believe that our federal government has an adequate policy on diversity, equity, and inclusion at this point?
Would you mind taking... That's great, thank you. It's a bit of an echo in here.
Do you believe that right now our federal government's policy on diversity, equity, and inclusion is adequate?
Well, it would be arrogant of me to suggest that I know all the details of what the current policies are. I think there's certainly a strong commitment and interest in creating diversity, but I think it also, the push for it has to come from below as well. I think members of Parliament and citizens have to also be supportive of these things. So I mean, the short answer is I don't really know all the details of what the policies are, but I think from what I've seen that there is an interest. For example, when the Prime Minister created his gender parity cabinet when he first became Prime Minister, and when a foreign political leader asked him why he did that and why he didn't just appoint on merit, he said, if I'd appointed on merit, I'd have had more women, which was, actually a pretty astute comment. So, but here's why I want to say about the challenge to policy, is that it's sometimes hard for us to see who's being excluded. I remember when my friend Mary Collins was the minister responsible for the status of women, we were talking one day about an issue, and I said, well, I guess there isn't really a gender dimension there. And she said, well, actually there is. And here was I, a rabid feminist, etc., and I had not seen it. There was a certain, I can't even remember what the issue was. And I think we have to recognize that even as women, we don't necessarily see how other women are affected by what we do. And so when I was legislating my sexual assault bill, we had meetings in Toronto and other places with women who were in the sex trade, women of communities of color who talked to us, to me and to my team, about the way the police regarded things like domestic violence in their communities. And you understand that you are limited by your own experience. So when we're looking at creating greater diversity, we have to always be open to the fact that there are people for whom the reality of life as they live it is not the reality of life that we understand it. And that's part of our challenge, is to broaden our understanding. And I think that having been born a woman and having dealt with sexism, that created for me a kind of portal through which I then moved to understand other forms of discrimination. And I think I'm a much more knowledgeable, sensitive and wise person on issues of race, sexuality, other forms of exclusion and discrimination than I was when I was in my 20s and 30s, because I was able to reason and to see by analogy how my own experience of people not treating me as a person but treating me on the basis of how I look to them as a woman, how that is replicated over and over again with other communities. So when we talk about policies of inclusion and diversity, we have to recognize it's an ongoing process, and we get layers and layers of revelation and wisdom that come as we start to see. I mean, I think the whole challenge that we're going through now with our Indigenous communities in Canada, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, our questioning of early leaders and what they did, and often for them at the time what they were doing maybe didn't seem particularly controversial, but we challenge it, we question it now. So I think a policy is one thing, but we have to be constantly improving our own wisdom and awareness of how exclusion functions in our society so that we can be agents for implementing and improving policies that help to lift up people who've been left out of many of the arrangements that we make just because we are too blind or too steeped in our own reality to recognize the injustices that we may unwittingly be doing by not recognizing who they are and what their needs are.
Absolutely. See, isn't she amazing? I think someone had best described politics as an onion with layers, and when you peel one layer back, you always have another layer, you always have another challenge, and I think even though it's been 100 years since the first woman, there's always going to be another challenge that someone is going to encounter, and we're going to work together to overcome that. And I think what I'm also getting from, the sentiments that you just shared is that it has to be an ever-growing and ever-learning process, and there has to be follow-through. It can't be just checking off a box because you're not done. It has to keep going. So I really loved that you shared that challenge. Was there ever any other challenges that you've experienced within the chambers or on the floors that really stood out to you, and that changed a perspective that you had at any point?
Well, I'm not sure it's so much that it changed the perspective, but I had some very interesting responsibilities and challenges as Minister of Justice and Attorney General, because there you're responsible for legislating the criminal law. And the criminal law and taxation law are two very important areas because you're creating frameworks where people can actually be punished if they contravene the provisions that you're setting up. Either you send them to jail for tax evasion or you send them to jail for criminal behavior. And what I found was that in dealing with a number of quite sensitive issues was the value of consultation and the value of building relationships of respect with people, even in my own caucus, who didn't necessarily agree with me. And I think that sense of humility, because I always recognize that every person in the caucus with me or in the opposition, we all had the same basis of legitimacy. Our voters had sent us there. Nobody can take that away from you when you're an MP. That you are in Ottawa, you are in the House on the same basis of legitimacy and authority as anybody else who's there. And when you start from that point of view of respect, then as you begin to try and negotiate shared views or some common ground to be able to legislate, and I dealt with difficult issues, abortion, gay rights, gun control. I mean, a lot of issues where even in my own caucus, people had divided views. And I learned that when you bring that kind of respect to people, first of all, you'll learn a lot more from them because you will seek people out. In fact, one of the most enjoyable parts of my job, and that goes back to even when I was on the school board in Vancouver or in the legislature, was consultation. I mean, going out and meeting the people who will be affected by what you're doing. First of all, they can save you from making really stupid mistakes, but it's a revelation. It's really a wonderful thing. But among your colleagues, I think that one of the things I learned was the importance of dealing respectfully with people, even though you may disagree. And I'll just give you an example. When I was running for the leadership, a lovely man from Ontario, Southern Ontario, named John Reimer came to see me. And John I'd actually, when I was doing my gun control legislation, I'd asked him to chair a special committee because it was a very contentious bill. And I wanted, before we got into second reading, I wanted to refer it to a committee so that members, because you can't reveal what's in a bill until you table it in the House. So I wanted to table it so that colleagues could take it home to their constituencies and discuss it over the break, but before they got into second reading debate. And so John chaired this special committee and colleagues were able to do this. And so we built a good relationship. But when I was defense minister and he came to see me, and now was declared a candidate for the leadership. And he said, I'm the chair of the Evangelical Caucus, and we want to know if you will treat us with the same respect if you become our leader that you did when you were Justice Minister. And I said, well, John, I'm the same person I always was, and my door's always open to you. I can't imagine why anything would be different. He said, because we would like to support you. Now, this is very interesting, because I'm socially very liberal, pro-choice, pro-gay rights, in legislating Congress. I mean, I'm from, Vancouver Centre. I mean, I was from a very different background. And we didn't agree on things. But because we'd built a relationship of trust, and they knew they always had my ear, that I would always listen to them, they knew they weren't going to win the arguments. They knew that some of the things that they wanted simply were not what our caucus in general was going to support or what the public would support. But I never treated them like their views were offensive or that they weren't entitled to have them, because their constituents sent them to articulate these particular perspectives. And I look back on that, and I think what a remarkable thing it was that level of trust. And that was why, incidentally, I had so much caucus support. When Brian Mulroney announced he was stepping down, over half the caucus declared their support for me. But it was because over those years legislating, I had built that relationship. And it's not because, I'm a great, wonderful person. It was because, first of all, I understood the limits of my own power. The fact that the Prime Minister makes you a minister doesn't mean that you get to go and say, okay, I'm the minister, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. The next thing you know, your caucus colleagues are all in the Prime Minister's office saying, you've got to stop the Justice Minister. So if you actually want to accomplish something, you have to genuinely recognize the limits on your own power and to build relationships of trust where people will be willing to lose arguments, knowing that they're not going to carry the day, but that they will never feel disrespected or never feel that they didn't get a chance to influence things as much as possible. And I think sometimes women may be particularly good at that because we don't assume our power. Maybe someday we'll be so equal and so powerful that we'll be real jerks. I don't know. But I think one of the things that is perhaps easier for a woman to understand is that she doesn't have that same built-in natural sense of privilege and, I'm a right to be, that you have to kind of win people's hearts and win their confidence. But for me, in some of the issues that I dealt with that were very sensitive, it served me well. And I actually passed a record amount of legislation in my 3 years as Minister of Justice because I was able to get that support.
No, I absolutely love that, and you spoke on the challenges there, and I think an unspoken challenge that many women and women in politics face is imposter syndrome. At any point with all of the hats and positions that you wore, did you ever feel imposter syndrome, or did you ever feel that you weren't deserving, or you felt your self-esteem kind of drop? And if you did, what was one thing that was your pick-me-up?
Well, this thing of imposter syndrome, yeah, I guess we all feel, for example, when I became Justice Minister, I had not had a long career. The law was a second career for me. And I had not gone to law school to practice law. I had gone to law school because I needed to retrain, because the field that I was originally in as a Soviet specialist teaching at the university, as a result of a very interesting kind of sexism, that's another time to tell that story, I wasn't able to have a tenure track academic position. So I needed to retrain. But I was of the first class of lawyers who trained about the charter, because the charter had just come in. And when I became Justice Minister, there was a journalist who wrote this absolutely scathing column like this: who is this total idiot, neophyte? How is she Justice Minister, blah, blah, blah. Although the interesting thing was that when I studied law, because I had been a Soviet specialist, I had lots of hooks to hang things on. And I found the law very congenial because I had this broader context of what the rule of law meant. And I loved studying the law, and I was good at it. And I think my colleagues in the Justice Department, the lawyers, thought that I was one of the more lawyerly ministers, interestingly enough, as my interest in it. But anyway, so this guy wrote this column, and I'm sort of, Sturm and Drang, like, oh dear. And I had a wonderful chief of staff named Miles Curvin, and he was one of these very kind of calm, droll people. And I'm ranting away, and maybe I should resign. He said, well, you could resign. But then you just let pardon the expression, the assholes like blank, blank, decide who gets to be Minister of Justice. And I said, you're right. But it was easy for me to recognize my inadequacies. But, we all have inadequacies. But I turned out to actually be very successful as a Justice Minister because I had this broader view of the social impact of what I was doing. And my legal education was fresh enough that I had a broad scope of things, because I always say when you graduate from law school, that's when you know the most about the law, because then you sort of narrow things down as you begin to practice whatever. So I think it's easy to feel imposter syndrome, and because if you're part of a group of people that doesn't assume you're right to be there. But it can be a healthy thing as well, because it can give you the humility to seek to learn and to look for good advice, and to become as knowledgeable and competent as you can be. But I can tell you from my observation that there are a lot of men who ought to have imposter syndrome. But as one of my friends who's a student of gender issues, and who created the Global Leadership and Diversity Program in a major American investment bank, she said, men have something called positive illusion. So if you say to a woman, you could be prime minister, the woman will say, well, here's all the reasons why I couldn't, or why I couldn't run for this, I couldn't run for that, and I haven't done this, and I haven't leapt tall buildings in a single bound, and I don't have 43 PhDs. If you say to a man, you could be prime minister, and he'll say, yeah, you're probably right, I'm a little busy at the moment, but I actually could probably do, it's positive illusion, but it comes from being a member of a group from which these people come naturally, and to see doing that as part of your natural birthright. So give up the imposter syndrome, ladies, and develop a little positive illusion.
We also have a question from the floor. Go ahead.
Hello, Ms. Campbell. It's an honor to be here with you this afternoon.
I can't hear you.
Speak a little louder.
Louder? Hello, Ms. Campbell. It's an honor to be here with you this afternoon. I have two questions. The first question is, what is the most defining moment you had as a Justice Minister in your time in Parliament? And the second question I have is, one policy that you believe the federal government should
pass? I'm finding it very difficult to hear you. Can you just follow the microphone as you're speaking? Yeah, sorry.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Did you hear the first question?
Yeah.
And the second question would be, what is one policy you believe the current federal government should pass regarding women, diversity, and inclusion?
Regarding the...
Regarding women, diversity, and inclusion.
I'm sorry.
Women, diversity, and inclusion. So one policy
that you believe the federal government should pass regarding...
Well,
and then the first question was, what's your most defining moment in Parliament?
Well, I think a lot of it is what they're trying to do. I think simply providing more support and priority to those who are already doing the gender audits in policy. In other words, I think the governments have in most places now put into place vehicles for identifying where there is gender exclusion or bias, etc. The real challenge is what priority they're given and how willing they are to use those analyses to change course in policy. And so the formal policy is not necessarily the end of the story. And that's where having more women in the House and in the cabinet matters, because they are the ones who will say, hang on a minute, we've already been told that there is a gender issue here. And they will push to have it recognized in the policy. Whereas if there aren't a lot of women, then it's easy for people to say, well, that may be very interesting, but we have to do such and such because of another reason. So it is the collective consciousness of those who are making the decisions that influences whether these considerations become a priority or whether they're simply something that people pay lip service to. So that is where, running in a pack and, serving en masse as lots of women, that's where gender parity will make the difference, is the will and the power to enforce norms. But what I think is interesting is that there was a time when those norms weren't even there. And I'm old enough to remember when men would say, well, let us solve the difficult issues and then we'll talk about women's issues. Let us deal with the real issues. The women's issues are kind of separate. Nobody says that now. So we've made that kind of progress, and where evaluations of policies for their effect on women and children and other marginalized people are happening. But now the real challenge is to push for the implementation of those insights against other interests that also exist in government. I think we may be getting the signal. Are we getting the signal that we have to take a break?
I think we have 2 more questions.
2 more questions. Okay, good.
So, right here.
Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. You've touched upon a couple of the questions that I was thinking of, but the question that stands out in my mind right now is, in the environment where, in government or in other organizations, where you might have women who aspire to be in certain positions, but they are fearful, and their fears might range from being Black, Indigenous, LGBTQ, or whatever their fears might be. And sometimes they get into these positions, be it in government or in any other organization, but there is a feeling that they're being forced out. They're being forced out of government. They're being forced out of the position either because of the way they look, because of the color of their skin, or whatever. So my question to you is, if you are in government or in any organization and you feel that the odds are against you and things might be happening to make you feel discouraged, to make you feel like you need to quit, or you feel like you're being forced out, with your experience, what would be your encouragement to someone who is in that role, any role, government or otherwise, who feel that way? What would your encouragement be to them so that they will remain focused and they will achieve because they feel like, I've worked hard to be here and I deserve to be here?
Well, that's a very powerful and important question and observation. And what one can do varies by circumstance. But I often say that when non-prototypical people put themselves forward or achieve certain positions, sometimes there are some human sacrifices. As I say, when I became Prime Minister, no one who looked or sounded like me had ever done that job. And for many people in the Ottawa Press Gallery who thought they owned the political process, it was a crisis. I mean, they all had to lie down with, a cold compress on their head, because I did not reflect the physiognomy, the style that they associated with the leader. And now we look at somebody like Angela Merkel. Now, when Angela Merkel became leader of the Christian Democrats, one of my colleagues from the Club of Madrid, former president or prime minister, said, the Christian Democrats have elected a woman leader. That means Germany could have a woman chancellor. And he said, oh no, if they win, she won't be the chancellor. And I said, well, how do you figure that? It was so unthinkable for him that the position that had been occupied by Helmut Kohl or Helmut Schmidt or Willy Brandt could be occupied by this mild-mannered, inoffensive woman. But she is now retiring as one of the most respected leaders in the world. So the more we get women doing this, that Finland has a governing coalition of 5 parties, all of whom are led by women, and I think only 1 or 2 of them is over 35. So we're getting youth changes too that are challenging people. But when you encounter that, in 1993, it was hard for me to do anything about it. And it's interesting now how many people are interested in going back and looking at the coverage of that election, people writing books about it to try and because it's now become so clear how biased the coverage was. It's a mug's game for me to talk about it, but I'm interested in other people see it. So I can't promise you that you will always find justice. But here is where government is so important. If we can create public norms, if we create laws that protect against discrimination, if those who govern us and all of us who are part of government stand up for those principles of inclusion, we give people something to hang on to say it's not just me trying to get recognition for me in this particular organization. It's a bigger issue. I remember once being at a conference, I think it was in Washington, a conference on sexual assault, and a woman from, I think she was from Chile or I think she was from Chile, she said to me, how do we persuade our men that it's not all right to rape? And my hair sort of went doing, because I thought, oh my God. And I said to her, Well, I don't know in your country how you deal with the expectations men have about their rights to women's bodies. But your concern is not limited to your country. There is a growing global consensus about the fact that sexual assault is a crime, that it's not acceptable, that the International War Crimes Tribunal at The Hague has made systemic rape a war crime, that countries like my own have passed very strong sexual assault legislation. My bill was known as the No Means No bill, and we actually defined as a matter of law where consent could not be found. You couldn't argue consent if a woman was too inebriated to consent, or if there was a power imbalance, etc. So I said, you need to look outside your own country at the sources of norms that support you in what you're trying to change there. You're not alone. Others are defining those norms. And that's what I say, the more you can have respectable bodies, authoritative bodies, defining the norms that protect your right to be treated as an individual, to be treated with dignity, that can help. And laws that provide recourse for discrimination. But I know that it can be very hard. It's easy to say these things, but you can't do lobotomies on everybody in your organization and sort of reprogram and stick a chip in their brain that gets rid of their attitudes. But I think so I don't have a simple answer except to say that if you can look outside for allies and people who support you, and people perhaps in your own particular kind of organization who've gone through it, we're not even for white privileged women, we're not through the thickets. For women of color, for women and other marginalized groups who are doubly, triply discriminated against, it's very, very hard. And I think we have to have solidarity, that all of us have to use whatever power we have in our organizations to share that power with women who are struggling because they are being discriminated against, perhaps for the color of their skin or because of their disabilities. But I think that the more we can create norms and legal protections, the more the narrative of our society is, this is not okay. And I was talking on the radio this morning and saying that when Donald Trump, his Access Hollywood tape, when that came out, what was so terrible about it was that here was somebody who was aspiring to be president, who became president, in a sense giving permission to people, to men, to have those appalling attitudes. And it is such a betrayal of the moral responsibility of leadership. And we need to use the responsibility of leadership to uphold those values that do not say to people that kind of behavior is acceptable or we'll shrug our shoulders at it. So I think we need to see the support that comes from all of the communities that accept and articulate and enshrine these values of protection and use them. But I would be lying if I said that that's enough. I think the tragedy is that there are a lot of people who hold retrograde views and that there is injustice. All we can do is commit ourselves to the solidarity of people who are suffering from it and to try as much as we can to help those situations not happen. But we're not there yet, and that is why the involvement of women in governing our country and creating those norms is so crucial, is so urgent, because the battle isn't won yet.
No.
But I should say that knowing that you belong and you deserve to belong there is something quite separate from the realities of discrimination you may face. And I think it may be hard, but I think it is important to cling to your understanding of who you are. And an injustice may be being done, but that's not your fault, and it's not a reflection of your own inadequacy. It's a reflection of the inadequacy of the environment that you're working in.
Thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you for answering all of our questions, and to our audience members who asked those tough and challenging questions. We sincerely appreciate your time. We're now going to be taking a 15-minute break. Please take some time to check out the amazing projects that are in the hall and take a moment to contribute to the wall of inspiration. You may have a chance to win a prize, and we'll see you back here for our next panel that will be taking place in French. So if you need translation, please take a moment to also grab translation devices. Again, thank you so much, Ms. Campbell, and thank you for all of you for joining us here today.
Thank you for being here.
So, we're gonna go. Nous allons reprendre. For those of you who are English speaking, the channel 1 for the translation. Donc, bienvenue encore, bonjour à tous. Donc, j'ai le plaisir de vous présenter notre prochaine modératrice, Amen Ben Amunda. Elle est diplômée de l'Université d'Ottawa en administration publique et en sciences politiques. Elle a plus de 4 ans d'expérience en relations gouvernementales, en politique et en politique publique. Elle est une ancienne déléguée du programme héritière du suffrage pour la cohorte 2017 et était plus récemment responsable des affaires publiques et des programmes pour à voix égales. Elle contribue à la toute première édition virtuelle des HDS. Amen est passionnée par la politique inclusive et le bilinguisme. Elle fait présentement une maîtrise en sciences politiques à l'université McGill. Donc, accueillons Madame Amen.
Merci Jenny pour cette belle introduction. Je suis vraiment, c'est un privilège d'être devant vous en présentiel aujourd'hui. J'ai vraiment hâte pour ce panel. Et je suis très honorée d'être avec 3 anciennes députées qui viennent du Québec. Et donc, on est avec l'honorable Eleni Bakopanos, Madame Ève-Mary Thaï Thi Lac et Laurine Lou. Donc, l'honorable Eleni Bakopanos a été élue députée de Saint-Denis pour la première fois en 1993. Elle a été réélue 3 fois à Ahuntsic, parfait, et est membre du conseil privé. Elle a occupé plusieurs postes parlementaires, notamment ceux de vice-présidente adjointe et de secrétaire parlementaire du ministre de la Justice et procureur général du Canada. Donc, elle est aussi présidente sortante d'À voix égales, qui est très important, donc c'est un privilège de la voir aujourd'hui. Madame Thaï Thi Lac est née durant la guerre du Vietnam à Kien Hon. Elle est une autochtone de la communauté Cham qui tire de l'origine de la Polynésie. Elle fut adoptée par une famille québécoise au début des années 70. Elle fut élue à la Chambre des communes du Canada en 2007 et la première personne d'origine vietnamienne élue à la Chambre du Canada. Ancienne députée du Bloc québécois, elle milite pour l'indépendance du Québec. Et dernièrement, on a Laurine Lou. Elle était députée canadienne entre 2011 et 2015 et a été la plus jeune femme députée de l'histoire du Canada, donc vraiment impressionnant. Pendant son mandat, elle a été porte-parole adjointe pour l'environnement, la science et la technologie et le commerce international. Donc, bienvenue et merci d'avoir accepté l'invitation d'être avec nous aujourd'hui. On va commencer. J'ai quelques questions pour vous. J'en ai 3 à 4 questions à vous poser. Mais peut-être pour que le public se familiarise un peu plus avec vous, on peut commencer et vous pouvez me parler un peu de votre expérience en politique. Donc peut-être on peut commencer avec vous, Laurine.
Oui, bien sûr. Je suis originaire de Montréal. J'ai grandi à Montréal, mais je suis d'origine chinoise. Et je me suis impliquée en politique mais j'ai commencé un peu une carrière en militantisme à l'Université McGill. Donc, j'ai commencé en luttant pour la baisse des frais de scolarité. Je me suis aussi impliquée dans quelques causes sociales. Je me suis impliquée dans la radio étudiante, CKUT. Donc, ça m'a familiarisé beaucoup avec des mouvements sociaux à Montréal, des enjeux sociaux et des inégalités qui existaient dans ma propre communauté. Et je me suis rendu compte rapidement que c'est vrai qu'il faut avoir des militants sur le terrain, des mouvements comment dire, grassroots, mais il faut aussi qu'il y ait des solutions qui viennent de nos institutions de pouvoir. Donc, je me suis rendu compte qu'il fallait aussi lutter pour des changements au législatif, qu'il fallait changer les lois au Canada au niveau fédéral et provincial pour vraiment changer les choses pour les personnes. Donc c'est pourquoi j'ai pris au NPD. C'est vraiment le parti politique qui a plus rejoint mes valeurs en tant que féministe, en tant qu'environnementaliste et aussi mes valeurs sociaux. On sait qu'au Québec, nous sommes un peu tous des social-démocrates, au sens où on a quand même été des pionniers au niveau de notre système de santé.
Merci.
Thank you. Alors, j'ai pris ma carte de membership au NPD parce que je voulais changer la politique au fédéral, parce que je voulais m'impliquer pour changer les lois. Et je me rappelle quand je me suis présentée dans une réunion des jeunes néo-démocrates du Québec, il y avait 2 postes ouverts pour les postes de coprésident. Et dans les politiques du parti, les bylaws, il y avait une règle où une des personnes qui se présentaient devrait s'identifier comme étant pas un homme, donc c'est-à-dire s'identifier comme étant une femme ou non-binary. Et je ne pensais pas me présenter à la coprésidence des Jeunes démocrates du Québec, mais j'avais une amie qui a pris mes mains, comme elle levait les mains dans la salle, elle dit elle va se présenter. Et ça, c'était quand j'avais 18 ans, donc ça fait plus de 12 ans. Et après ça, je me suis impliquée dans plusieurs campagnes politiques. Je me rappelle d'avoir cogné sur les portes à Chinatown, à Montréal, avec Jack Layton et Olivia Chow. Et c'était vraiment le fun avec Jack Layton. Tout le monde le connaissait. C'était vraiment génial. Et je me pensais pas me présenter en politique, mais dans les élections de 2011, j'étais approchée par un organisateur pour le parti au Québec qui a dit on a besoin que quelqu'un se présente en Rivière-des-Mille-Îles. On a une politique où au moins 50% de nos candidats doivent être des femmes. Donc, est-ce que tu veux te présenter? Et j'ai dit, mais il faut que je fasse mes examens. Je fais encore mes examens du premier cycle, mais je me suis présentée sans attendre à être élue. Mais comme vous savez tous, en 2011, il y avait une grosse vague orange et j'étais élue à l'âge de 20 ans au Parlement et j'ai passé 4 ans à la Chambre des communes.
Super. Merci Laurine d'avoir partagé ça avec nous. Ensuite, oui, on l'applaudit. Ensuite, Eleni, si vous voulez nous dire comment a été votre expérience en politique fédérale.
Est-ce que ça...
Oh, okay. Oui, c'est on, ouais.
So, bonjour à tout le monde et merci beaucoup. C'est vraiment un plaisir aujourd'hui et je veux saluer aussi mes anciens collègues qui sont ici aussi aujourd'hui. C'est vraiment un plaisir de se voir en personne. Ça fait longtemps qu'on ne s'est pas vu en personne, so je suis très contente. Et bravo à tous les employés à voix égales qui ont vraiment fait cet bel événement pour célébrer les 100 ans. Pour avoir toute ma carrière, ça va prendre au moins 3 heures. So, on va faire ça très vite.
Je vous donne 1 minute.
J'étais née en Grèce. J'étais 5 ans quand mes parents ont immigré à Montréal. J'ai eu une enfance très simple, pas dans la pauvreté, mais pas très riche non plus. Mais je me suis intéressée à la politique à l'âge de 16 ans. Et pourquoi? Parce qu'il y a eu le premier référendum, pour les gens qui ne savent pas, au Québec, qui s'en vient, c'est discuté, le Parti québécois, ce n'était pas le référendum encore, mais ça commençait à discuter. So, j'étais dans le mouvement Scott et un des anciens amis... Oh, le micro. Ah. Est-ce que ça marche avec les batteries? C'est pour ça? En tout cas... j'ai eu 16 ans et l'ancien député de Saint-Denis m'a demandé de faire la distribution des pamphlets. Et de là, c'est un peu, si tu veux, karma, que c'est moi qui l'ai remplacé 20 ans plus tard comme députée de Saint-Denis. Et aujourd'hui, Saint-Denis, juste pour les gens qui veulent savoir, c'est le comté du premier ministre. Ça ne s'appelle pas Saint-Denis parce que Saint-Denis a disparu de la carte électorale et c'est maintenant Laurier qui est Papineau, excuse-moi, Laurier c'est provincial, Papineau, qui est le comté du premier ministre parce qu'il y a eu un pourcentage de ma communauté qui était là. So, tout ça dit, j'ai terminé mes études, je vais aller fast forward, comme on dit. J'ai terminé mes études de droit, mais dans mon première année de droit, je faisais du bénévolat quand même pour le Parti libéral du Québec. Et pour quelques députés, où je faisais des appels pour dire à les commettants d'origine grecque d'aller voter. D'aller voter, évidemment, pour les deux hommes que j'ai travaillé. À ce moment, c'était Marcel Prudhomme qui était reconnu dans la politique canadienne pour les gens qui connaissent un peu l'historique politique et aussi M. Lalonde qui était le ministre pendant le temps de Pierre-Elliott Trudeau. So, je faisais des appels, j'ai appris un peu, ils étaient des bons exemples aussi au niveau des gens qui étaient sur le terrain de plusieurs façons. Mais j'ai commencé à travailler en 1980, juste avant le référendum pour le Parti libéral, pour Claude Ryan, qui était le chef dans ce moment pour le Parti libéral du Québec. Et j'étais organisatrice pour les communautés culturelles. Et on a fait du terrain, évidemment, pour convaincre les citoyens du Québec de voter, évidemment, non à la séparation. Et c'était mon première grande expérience, si tu veux dire, sur le terrain. De là, M. Claude Ryan m'a demandé de rester, parce qu'on était allé en campagne électorale. Et c'était le deuxième mandat du Parti québécois qui a gagné. Là, le nouveau chef m'a demandé de rester. La loi restait à côté. J'ai terminé 2 ans entre les deux, mais j'ai continué à travailler sur le terrain. Quand on a formé le gouvernement, j'étais conseillère de la ministre de l'Immigration et des communautés culturelles et conseillère au Conseil des trésors du Québec pour les communautés culturelles. Ça était mon expertise, si tu veux, au niveau du terrain politique. Et aussi au premier ministre Robert Bourassa, de la personne que j'ai appris beaucoup. Et une des choses qu'il a dit, et je vais le dire immédiatement, la politique Eleni, c'est ingrat. Et il m'a dit ça, pourquoi? Parce que lui, il était premier ministre, son propre parti l'a jeté, et là, ils l'ont dit de revenir quand ils ont eu vraiment besoin, appelé Claude Ryan. So, il a tout vécu une expérience, M. Robert Bourassa, mais c'était un des mentors, si tu veux, qui m'a aidé beaucoup au niveau d'apprendre des choses très pertinentes au niveau de la politique. Et de là, je me suis mariée, j'étais enceinte, so j'ai devenu vice-présidente du Conseil des communautés culturelles et d'immigration du Québec, qui était vraiment un organisme de consultation pour les communautés culturelles du gouvernement du Québec, mais ça n'existe plus. Et en 1993, il y a eu des élections. M. Marcel Prudhomme, député de Saint-Denis, était nommé au Sénat par M. Mulroney, mais on va expliquer ça une autre fois, un libéral qui se nomme au Sénat par le premier ministre conservateur. Et là, le comté était ouvert de Saint-Denis avec au moins 20 000 électeurs à ce moment-là d'origine grecque. Et là, j'ai eu un appel. Dans un vendredi soir de M. Chrétien, qui était le chef à ce moment, pas premier ministre encore, et il m'a demandé si je suis intéressée de me présenter dans Saint-Denis. J'ai presque tombé de ma chaise avec 2 petites bébés à la maison, 1 an et demi et 3 ans et demi, et j'ai dit non. Je m'excuse, M. Chrétien, mais honnêtement, avec 2 bébés à la maison et mon mari qui travaille à temps plein, là, il m'a dit, j'ai tellement de bonnes recommandations que tu es la personne parfaite pour ce comté, tu as l'expérience. Et lui, il voudrait avoir au moins à ce moment, grâce au Parti libéral et les militantes, il était obligé d'avoir au moins 30% des candidates femmes. Et c'est pour ça qu'il cherchait plein de femmes pour se présenter et ceux qui au moins ont eu quelques expériences dans la politique. Et je sais que c'est le bureau de M. Bourassa et son chef de cabinet qui était un ami qui l'a recommandé. Mais il m'a donné, il était très sage, il m'a dit, je te donne la fin de semaine pour réfléchir et d'aller chercher ta carte de membre du Parti libéral du Canada. Là, j'étais allée chez moi, je l'ai dit à mon mari, et mon mari a dit, pourquoi non, Eleni? J'ai dit, es-tu malade? Il y a 2 jeunes enfants à la maison. On va s'organiser. Le moment que lui, il a dit oui, là, j'ai fait mes appels parce qu'il faut avoir d'argent pour se présenter. J'ai fait des appels à des amis. Tout ça dit, finalement, j'étais allée chercher ma carte au niveau du Parti libéral. Et juste pour retourner au niveau de karma, j'ai remplacé la personne à la Chambre des communes qui était le premier député avec lequel j'ai travaillé il y a des années avant. Mais je vais terminer là, je pense que ça donne un bon portrait. Mais j'ai passé 25 ans au provincial en arrière de la scène et j'ai osé, après ça, de me présenter comme député. Et là, comme je dis, la carte électorale a changé et je me suis présentée à Hansik où je vis depuis 55 ans. Juste pour vous dire ça, j'ai représenté vraiment mes commettantes. Et si je me permets une joke, OK? Mon père était plus connu dans Hansik que moi parce qu'il a eu un restaurant comme toutes les bonnes Grecques qui achètent des restaurants. Oui. Et là, tout le monde me disait « Ah, vous êtes la fille de Johnny. » So, j'ai dit à mon père, qui était très fier, que « Regarde, j'ai gagné dans Hansik grâce à toi, papa. » So, je termine là et merci beaucoup.
Super, merci Eleni. Je vous avoue que ce n'est pas la première fois que j'entends comment Eleni est impliquée en politique et c'est toujours inspirant, donc c'est un parcours très intéressant. Je vous donne la parole, Madame Thaï Thi Lac, pour nous dire votre expérience.
Ben, merci, Aman. Je veux tout d'abord remercier, saluer l'engagement de toute l'organisation. Parce qu'on sait qu'une journée comme ça, là, c'est doublement d'organisation en temps de pandémie. Que félicitations à toutes les personnes qui sont impliquées de près ou de loin dans votre organisation. Puis merci de votre invitation. Je vous dirais que moi, mon engagement a débuté là, au début des années 90. En fait, mon militantisme actif, je suis membre fondateur du Bloc québécois, la formation pour laquelle j'ai été élue. J'ai commencé à militer, là, je vous dirais, comme indépendantiste. C'était rare, effectivement, pour quelqu'un qui était issu des communautés culturelles et également migrante d'être une sympathisante indépendantiste. Moi, j'ai été adoptée dans une famille québécoise qui militait pour l'indépendance, mais aussi je me suis fait une tête et c'est quelque chose avec lequel qui mariait bien mes convictions. J'ai travaillé, en fait, j'ai voté pour la première fois dans un référendum, puis je dis toujours que j'ai voté non. En fait, ça surprend les gens quand je leur dis ça, mais j'ai voté non au référendum de Charlottetown. En fait, la première fois que j'ai eu le droit de vote, c'est au référendum de Charlottetown. J'avais milité un peu sur Meach des années avant. Par la suite, j'ai voté à une élection générale pour la première fois au député qui s'est présenté sous la bannière du Bloc québécois dans la circonscription que j'ai représenté par la suite. Que dans le fond, moi, pour la première fois, j'ai voté pour l'homme à qui j'ai succédé. Par la suite, en 1993, j'ai travaillé avec lui jusqu'à mon élection en 2017. J'ai été élue lors d'une élection partielle. La particularité, souvent on taxe le Québec de ne pas être ouvert aux communautés culturelles ou d'avoir une certaine fermeture. Moi, je vous dis que je suis tout à fait l'exemple que c'est faux. J'ai été élue en région rurale. Je suis une femme avec un nom en consonance anglophone, un prénom de consonance anglophone et un nom d'origine étrangère. Je suis une minorité visible, pas audible parce qu'effectivement, je parle un peu comme les Québécois. Mon accent est vraiment, là, je me suis assimilée à l'accent des Québécois, mais j'étais très fière de représenter cette région-là où j'avais grandi. J'ai été élue lors d'une partielle, puis je vous dirais que pour le Bloc québécois, dans le temps, c'était pas facile parce que depuis 2004, on perdait beaucoup nos partiels. Et j'étais alors, moi, aussi en partiel en même temps que M. Mulcair, qui a été élu dans Outremont, et aussi une circonscription qui était au Bloc québécois dans Roberval, mais qui est passée aux mains des conservateurs. Que j'étais très heureuse, malgré tout, qu'on ait conservé notre siège pour notre formation politique. Et durant que j'ai été élue, je suis fière de dire qu'on était quand même sur 38 députés de ma formation, nous étions 15 femmes. 15 femmes et 4 qui représentaient des communautés culturelles. Il y avait Milly Faye, il y avait Maria Mourani, il y avait également la première haïtienne qui était Viviane Barbeau. Que sur 15 femmes, on avait une bonne représentativité également de femmes issues des communautés culturelles. Que le Bloc québécois a toujours été ouvert à cette diversité-là, et on le prouve. Et on a présenté beaucoup de femmes. C'est important pour notre formation de présenter des femmes, mais pas seulement des femmes dans des comtés. Vous savez, toutes nos circonscriptions de ce défi-là, c'est de présenter des femmes dans des comtés où, pour leur formation politique, c'est des gains. C'est le défi aussi, les femmes qu'on a en politique, de pouvoir se tailler une place jusqu'au Parlement.
Super, merci beaucoup. Donc, je passe à ma première question et je vais vous donner chaque 1 minute 30, 2 minutes pour répondre, juste pour qu'on puisse tous les poser. Donc, évidemment, vous étiez tous en politique longtemps et vous avez mentionné quelques défis pour les femmes en politique, notamment avoir des enfants et être le primary caretaker, comme ils disent, être une femme issue des communautés culturelles, notamment. Donc, est-ce que vous trouvez que les défis auxquels les femmes font face aujourd'hui sont les mêmes que quand vous étiez en politique? Peut-être on commence avec vous, Ève-Mary.
En fait, aujourd'hui, moi, je vous dirais qu'il y a plusieurs défis qui se sont ajoutés par rapport à moi lorsque j'ai été en politique il y a plus d'une dizaine d'années. C'est les médias sociaux. L'intensité avec laquelle les réactions, les diverses plateformes sur lesquelles les gens interviennent, et je vous dirais que c'est énormément personnel souvent les attaques qu'on va entendre envers les politiciens. Je vous dirais que ça, c'est peut-être un frein pour certaines femmes à venir en politique. L'autre chose, je trouve que des choses qui se sont améliorées, mais qui restent, on a beaucoup de chemin à faire aussi. Vous l'avez mentionné, c'est les femmes qui sont mères. Moi, je suis contente de voir que lors du dernier scrutin, on a Nathalie Saint-Clair-Desgagnés qui était enceinte, qui a accouché durant la campagne électorale et qui a été élue. De ma formation politique également, on a une femme qui est notre whip adjointe, Marlène Gill, qui a eu un enfant durant qu'elle a siégé. Que ça, c'est des défis que les femmes rencontrent. Puis je pense que les lois devraient être aussi adaptées pour ces mères-là, pas seulement pour qu'elles puissent venir siéger, mais pour des accommodations pour les enfants de ces femmes-là. Et je pense que ça, on a un pas à faire. Il y a également aussi toute la joute politique, je dirais, qui est le décorum. C'est très difficile. Moi, j'ai trouvé ça très difficile, les attaques, le fait que c'est pas toujours constructif. Et c'est très partisan. Et la période des questions, des fois, là, on dit toujours notre défi, c'est d'intéresser les gens à la politique, mais je pense qu'on doit rehausser le niveau de la politique.
Merci. On passe à Laurine.
Mais merci pour la question, parce que quand les gens me posent la question « Comment était ton expérience en politique ?», il est très difficile de répondre sans parler aussi de l'environnement extrêmement malsain qui existe sur la colline pour les femmes. Quand j'étais au Parlement, je pense qu'il y avait environ 35% des députés étaient des femmes, et maintenant moins d'un tiers des députés sont des femmes. C'est vraiment un chiffre qui me choque encore. Donc la Chambre des communes demeure un boys club, Et pour tous ceux, mais pour toutes celles qui, dans cette salle, qui ont déjà travaillé dans un environnement très masculin, vous savez que le harcèlement sexuel, le sexisme quotidien, c'est vraiment, comment on dit en anglais, a death by a thousand cuts. Ce sont 1000 coupures qui, à chaque jour, qui mais ont un effet sur votre santé mentale, mais aussi sur votre travail et sur votre capacité de faire votre travail sur une base quotidienne. Je me rappelle, quand je parlais avec mes collègues féminines, elles me parlaient aussi, partageaient beaucoup d'expériences similaires de harcèlement sexuel. Et je me rappelle quand Massimo Pichetti et Scott Andrews étaient exclus du caucus libéral pour l'inconduite sexuelle, que les jeunes femmes députées ont été suivies par des journalistes, mais quelques journalistes, disons, et par nos commettants, et ils nous demandaient comment est-ce que vous avez pu faire ça aux carrières de ces deux hommes? How could you do that to the careers of these two men? Et le fait que c'était ça la question qu'on nous posait, c'était vraiment, en tout cas, extrêmement choquant. Et je ne sais pas si la culture sur la colline a beaucoup changé depuis ces années, mais j'espère que oui. Il faut dire que c'était avant le mouvement MeToo. Mais je pense qu'il y a une chose qu'il faut surligner, c'est que la Chambre des communes ne va jamais cesser d'être un boys club avant qu'on élise au moins 50% des femmes.
Merci Dorine de nous avoir parlé de votre expérience. Madame Bakopanos.
Est-ce que ça marche? Oui. Je vais commencer avec une phrase en français qui fait vraiment le point. Plus ça change, rien ne change. Et je trouve que c'est important de se rappeler de ça. On a fait des pas et on est allé en arrière aussi. Il faut toujours être vigilante. La balance entre la vie familiale et la vie personnelle, parce que tu as un mari, un conjoint, un extra other, because I don't want to, date myself also on that, but the significant other, okay, je ne connais pas le mot en français, et la vie d'un député, ce n'est pas un travail. Il faut que les gens, vraiment, qui veulent se présenter dans la politique, comprennent que ce n'est pas un job, c'est une mission, c'est une passion. Et c'est 24 heures sur 7. Toutes les jeunes filles avec lesquelles je fais de mentorat, je leur dis, il faut avoir la passion et il faut avoir des convictions parce que c'est difficile. C'est difficile. Et maintenant, avec les médias sociaux, comme vous avez dit, c'est 10 fois plus difficile. C'est très personnel. Regarde Catherine McKenna et qu'est-ce qu'elle a subi au niveau personnel, au niveau de sa famille. Mais il y a une chose qu'on n'a pas touchée, sans rentrer dans les mêmes choses, parce que je ne veux pas m'irriter. Je viens d'une communauté très macho. Très macho. J'étais la seule sur une table d'honneur, femme. Et la plupart des fois, des invités qui viendraient de la Grèce, d'autres, disaient « Vous êtes la femme de qui, madame? » Et je dis « Oui, je suis la femme de ce monsieur qui s'appelle Constantine Yeropoulos, mais je suis aussi la vice-présidente de la Chambre et d'autres têtes. » Et là, leurs yeux commencent, parce que quand même, mon pays d'origine, où la démocratie a commencé, ils ont très peu de femmes. Ils ne sont pas ni 100 au niveau de la rang des... il faut dire, les communautés aussi, qui n'ont pas eu des femmes en leadership, c'est un grand défi pour eux de réaliser. Et moi, ça fait... N'oubliez pas que je suis un peu plus âgée que vous. Et il y a eu très peu des femmes dans la Chambre des communes. On était 8% qu'on était élus en 1993. Et si vous me le permettez, c'est un joke. On a eu une salle pour toilettes pour les femmes. Et ça nous a pris 1 an d'aller faire de lobbying auprès du président pour avoir une toilette qui était le demi des hommes sur où il y a eu les portes pour entrer dans la Chambre des communes. Une demi-salle. Bien des choses ont changé. Je suis très, très ravie des jeunes femmes qui se présentent et qui se présentent à n'importe quel âge, mais ce n'est pas un travail. C'est vraiment la passion et la mission qu'il faut avoir.
Merci beaucoup. Et merci pour tous vos efforts pour s'assurer que les femmes qui viennent après vous ont une expérience beaucoup, un peu plus facile en politique, il faut dire. Donc, vous avez parlé de l'harcèlement en ligne. On sait qu'avec la pandémie, on a vu une augmentation d'harcèlement en ligne envers les femmes, députées, conseils municipaux, etc. Donc, quel conseil donnez-vous aux femmes qui veulent s'impliquer en politique, mais qui craignent un peu ce genre d'harcèlement qui est de plus en plus commun, malheureusement. Donc, on commence avec vous, Laurine.
Et merci, je ne suis pas experte dans le domaine. Je pense que quand je me suis impliquée dans la politique, les plateformes comme Twitter, il faut dire que d'autres plateformes n'existaient pas encore, mais je dirais que j'ai lisé beaucoup de recherches d'une écrivaine assez bien connue au Québec, Léa Clémendion, qui a fait quand même assez beaucoup de recherches et d'études dans ce domaine. Je pense que en fait, le droit d'être présent en ligne, c'est vraiment le droit d'être présente dans l'espace public. Donc, il ne faut pas surestimer vraiment l'influence de l'harcèlement en ligne. Mais effectivement, il faut vraiment pencher sur ce sujet afin de vraiment créer des espaces sains pour les femmes, que ce soit en personne ou virtuel.
Merci beaucoup. Madame Bakopanos?
Vous savez, égales s'intéresse beaucoup à ce sujet et on essaie de travailler avec les législatures. On a un projet justement pour s'assurer qu'il y a des mesures en place pour les femmes de se sentir à l'aise, justement pour parler de harcèlement, petite ou grosse. Tout ça dit, il y a de progrès et je suis très encouragée à cause de ça parce que aussi il y a plus et plus de femmes qui ne laissent pas être une victime aujourd'hui. Bravo à tous ceux qui ont le courage de vraiment, parce que des fois tu es dans une position où la personne qui a fait le harcèlement a plus de pouvoir que toi et il y a toutes des choses autour de ça. Est-ce que mon travail. Évidemment, comme député, tu ne perds pas ton travail, mais dans mon temps, ça arrivait aussi. Mais les gens n'ont pas osé de le dire. Et je suis très encouragée maintenant avec tous les mouvements. Mais il y a aussi un progrès au niveau des lois. On regarde au Québec, qui est très progressif récemment. Ils ont changé le type de tribunal et le type de juge qui va écouter des cas, pas seulement d'harcèlement, de violence. Je suis très encouragée qu'au moins maintenant, ce n'est pas la fin de harcèlement, mais au moins il y a des mesures en place à tous les niveaux pour quelqu'un de vraiment se sentir à l'aise et ne pas se considérer seulement comme victime. Je vais arrêter là, mais les médias sociaux, quelque chose d'autre. Je suis très découragée. Il ne prend pas les mesures, plusieurs de ces médias sociaux, pour vraiment éliminer ce type de harcèlement. On est obligé nous-mêmes de faire delete. Pourquoi? Il faut vraiment qu'il y ait des mesures en place au niveau de Facebook, au niveau de Twitter, au niveau de WhatsApp, au niveau de tous ces médias sociaux, et ils ne sont pas encore là. Et ça, c'est un gros problème dans notre société, en mon opinion. Merci.
Merci à vous. Ève-Mary?
Oui. En fait, on a parlé beaucoup des difficultés d'être femme en politique. Puis j'espère qu'aujourd'hui, là, ça ne vous freinera pas à devenir des femmes candidates et à aspirer à ce genre de carrière-là. Parce qu'il y a beaucoup de beaux. Et je vous dirais qu'au niveau du harcèlement, maintenant, l'avancée qui a été faite au niveau du Parlement par rapport aux années où nous, on était élus, c'est que maintenant, l'ensemble du personnel politique, les députés et ainsi que les fonctionnaires doivent suivre une formation sur le harcèlement sexuel. C'est une formation qui est obligatoire et que chaque personne doit réussir. Je vous dirais que aussi, les femmes, faites-vous confiance. Oui, on est souvent victime, en grosse majorité, du harcèlement. Cependant, dites-vous que nous sommes fortes comme individus, de ne pas accepter ça. La première chose, de ne pas l'accepter, autant Lauren qu'Eleni, vous l'avez bien identifié, c'est de le dénoncer, mais ne le prenez pas trop personnel. Ce sont des attaques qui viennent de gens qui ne vous connaissent pas, qui ont pour but de vous attaquer, mais de ne pas... Le truc que je vais vous donner, c'est de ne pas trop vous laisser atteindre non plus par ce genre de remarques-là, parce que souvent, et je dis souvent, mais tout le temps, c'est des faussetés. Ça ne devrait pas être dirigé envers vous, que vous n'avez pas à le prendre personnellement. Je sais que c'est difficile à dire, effectivement. Vous parliez de passion tantôt. Moi, je vais renchérir en parlant d'engagement. Mais dites-vous que vous êtes le porte-parole de plusieurs femmes aussi. Quand vous êtes une élue, vous êtes le porte-voix de toute votre communauté, notamment aussi des femmes. Que n'hésitez pas à répondre aussi à vos agresseurs en leur disant que vous ne tolérez pas ce type de comportement-là aussi. Parce que il faut ne pas banaliser ce type de comportement-là.
Merci beaucoup, Ève-Mary. Donc peut-être on peut, juste pour ne pas dissuader le public de s'impliquer en politique, on a fait beaucoup de réflexions sur le passé et le progrès qu'on a fait en tant que femme en politique. Peut-être on peut parler du futur. Donc quels sont vos souhaits pour les femmes en politique pour les 100 prochaines années? Donc on commence avec vous justement, Eleni.
Je n'ai pas un bol pour vraiment prédire l'avenir, mais je veux être très, très positive. Parce que ce n'est pas négatif. J'ai eu la meilleure expérience de ma vie. Honnêtement, à part d'être une mère de deux filles qui sont plus jeunes, je dis toujours jeune fille comme maman, mais c'était une expérience extraordinaire. J'ai appris beaucoup de choses et j'encourage plein des femmes de n'importe quel âge, de n'importe quel métier, d'avoir cette expérience. Il ne faut pas le manquer si c'est ça que tu veux faire dans la vie. Et on est là à voix égale. Et moi, et d'autres députés qui sont ici, Jean par exemple, Nancy et tous les autres qui sont ici, on est là pour vous aider, pour vous montrer le chemin, comme d'autres ont montré le chemin, comme nous, ceux qui étaient les 100 dernières années. Mais j'aimerais avoir un peu plus des lois, et ça c'est mon souhait, si tu veux. Les femmes veulent se présenter, il n'y a aucun problème. On a eu un record des femmes qui se sont présentées dans la dernière deux campagnes électorales fédérales et au provincial et au municipal, je peux dire. De ma ville de Montréal, je suis très encouragée au niveau de la diversité qui est là. Mais il y a des gens qui veulent garder leur pouvoir. Et qu'est-ce qui est intéressant de Montréal et pourquoi je le dis? Parce que maintenant, les femmes sont dans les positions de pouvoir. Okay? Et c'est là que tu peux aider plus de femmes et c'est ça que ma mère a fait, je dis ma mère, Valérie Plante, je veux dire my mayor. She is like a mother in any case. Mais tout ça dit, ne pas avoir peur de demander à une autre femme, n'importe qui s'est déjà présentée, de les aider, de les conseiller, de leur dire c'est quoi les sacrifices, de dire c'est quoi les défis. Moi, je ne prends pas toutes ces connaissances avec moi. Je veux le partager. Et c'est pour ça que je t'ai impliquée à voix égale. Okay? Parce que je veux partager l'expérience et pour dire à les gens, faites-la. Do it. Il faut. On a besoin de vous. So, je vais terminer là.
Merci beaucoup, Eleni. Donc, on passe à vous, Laurie. Quels sont vos souhaits pour les femmes? Et désolée, mais on a 30 secondes chaque.
Parfait, mais je pense qu'il faut absolument briser le Boys Club. Nos institutions politiques sont extrêmement brisées et vont rester brisées tant qu'on n'a pas élu au moins 50% des femmes. Donc, il y a plusieurs façons de le faire. Mon ancien collègue, Kennedy Stewart, maintenant la maire de Vancouver, a déposé un projet de loi qui allait pénaliser les partis qui ne présentent pas 50% des femmes candidats. On peut aussi changer notre façon, notre système électoral. Nous pouvons avoir un système de représentation proportionnelle qui va assurer une représentation plus diversifiée. Et aussi, il y a plusieurs mesures au niveau du parti qu'on peut prendre pour encourager plus de femmes. Mais je vais m'arrêter là. Mais je souhaite aux femmes un avenir plus égalitaire et voilà.
Merci beaucoup. Ève-Mary.
En fait, toutes les mesures que mes collègues ont identifiées sont excellentes. Je ne vais pas les répéter, je vais réenchérir aussi que c'est une responsabilité des partis. Un coup qu'on est élu, c'est de faire de la place au niveau des postes que vous allez donner dans la structure de que ce soit dans les cabinets, que ce soit dans le cabinet fantôme également, que cette représentativité des femmes soit cohérente avec les idées que vous défendez comme parti. Je crois également aussi qu'on parle, Eleni, vous avez parlé de si ça vous tente, pas seulement, parce que souvent, comme vous avez dit, comme moi également, quand j'ai dit non, moi je ne veux pas me lancer en politique, là, je cherchais à trouver quelqu'un d'autre à ma place. Et non, faites-vous confiance, laissez-vous convaincre avant de dire non. Parce que, vous l'avez dit, c'est une expérience très enrichissante. L'autre chose aussi, avant de se lancer en politique, je vous dirais qu'on a un devoir de femme de convaincre les autres femmes d'aller voter. On voit que d'élection en élection, le taux de suffrage est de moins en moins élevé. Et ça, là, on oublie qu'on est dans une démocratie au Québec et au Canada. On oublie ça. Moi, je viens d'un pays où s'il y a un gouvernement, c'est un gouvernement communiste. On oublie qu'on a le droit d'élire nos gouvernements. Et là, actuellement, ce qui m'inquiète, c'est que beaucoup de personnes, notamment des femmes, c'est pas si loin que ça, 100 ans, là, notamment des femmes qui boudent le droit de vote. Ça, je pense qu'on a aussi une responsabilité par vos organisations individuellement de convaincre les femmes d'aller faire leur devoir de citoyenne.
Merci beaucoup. On vient juste d'avoir une élection fédérale, donc j'espère que tout le monde ici a voté, si vous étiez admissible. Donc, merci beaucoup à notre panel. On les applaudit. Donc, merci beaucoup d'avoir partagé avec nous vos expériences puis vos conseils. Maintenant, nous allons prendre une pause de 10-15 minutes. 10 minutes, quelqu'un m'a dit 10 minutes. Donc, jetez un coup d'œil aux incroyables projets qui sont juste dans le hall et prenez une minute pour contribuer au mur de l'inspiration où vous pourrez gagner un prix, ce qui est cool. Et nous vous retrouvons pour notre première panel en anglais. Alors, prenez vos appareils de traduction si vous en avez besoin. Donc, merci beaucoup et on se voit dans 10 minutes.
Merci, Amen, à toi aussi pour ta belle animation.
Merci beaucoup. Merci.
Everyone, we'll be beginning again shortly. If you could just return to your seats, and you could also return the translation devices back at the back of the room. Yes. Welcome back, everyone. Wasn't that last panel wonderful? So we will now have a panel in English moderated by Umpai Tamachek. She is the co-founder of the Glass Slipper organization that aims to create inclusivity, the founder, owner, and director of the Step Above Stigma charity that works to raise awareness and funds for mental health across Canada, the co-founder of Elucia, a federally incorporated business and patent-pending accessible clothing company, MA candidate at Queen's University, Bank of Montreal scholar, Agnes Benedictson Tricolor Award winner, CSPN's Entrepreneur of the Year, one of her campus's top 22 under 22 most inspiring college women, and a former DOV delegate. She aspires to complete her MBA and become a member of parliament. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Alanis. We had some last-minute changes to our panel today, but I could not be more pleased and honored to introduce the Honourable Jean Augustine, who made history as the first Afro-Canadian woman elected to Parliament. Hey. And served from 1993 to 2006. Her tenure included service as Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, Minister of State for Multiculturalism and the Status of Women, Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and Deputy Speaker of Parliament. Her legislative successes include the Black History Month motion, and from 2007 to 2015, she served as Ontario's first ever Fairness Commissioner. She is a member of the Order of Canada and CBE. Round of applause. Next, we have Salma Zahid, who was elected as the Member of Parliament for Scarborough Centre in 2015 and re-elected in 2019. Salma is the chair of the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration and a member of the Standing Committee on the Status of Women. She is the first woman to wear a hijab in the House of Commons. Rechie Valdez was elected in October 2021 as the MP for Mississauga-Streetsville. Rechie has had 15 years of corporate banking experience and was recently the Vice President of Marketing and creative head of multiple brands that span the print, marketing, apparel, food, and sports industry. She is the first Filipino-Canadian woman elected to the House of Commons. Nancy Karetak-Lindell is the first Inuit woman elected to the House of Commons in 1997 and served until 2008. She was the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources in 2003 and served on the Standing Committee on Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development and the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. She was a key player in the negotiations to establish Nunavut as a political jurisdiction in Canada. Every single time I read all of your bios, I shed a happy tear and I'm so blown away. So I could not be more honored to jump into some questions with you all today. My first question is that making systemic change is certainly not always pretty or straightforward. So what are some things all of you do to stay centered in times when you may have felt silenced, dismissed, or have received hate? Anyone?
Are they going by age or by... I was called an elder lately, so I'll take that position of elder. The question was quite clear. Somehow or the other, with your microphone, there is a little bit of...
Oh, I'm so sorry. Let's try one more time. Making systemic change is not always straightforward, and it's definitely not always easy. How do you stay centered in times when you have felt dismissed or silenced?
I think if one is assured about what the cause, the reason for participation in whatever, and there is something I call fire in the belly, and a sense of self, and a sense of self-assurance that somehow one is not deterred by negative remarks. One is not deterred by what I call agents provocateurs, people who try to say things to throw you off your game, as it were. And at the same time, recognizing, as someone said, someone who's doing a lot of work in race relations, etc., you may not be responsible for falling down, but you have the responsibility for picking yourself up. Absolutely. And therefore, you do not allow yourself to be a victim. You do not take the situation of victimization. And if someone does or says anything that would that's negative towards you, you look for the other side of the coin. It's their problem, not yours.
Amazing. I won't forget to have that fire in your belly. It's very important. Would anyone else like to share how they bounce back?
I can comment on that. I know like bringing a change is not easy, and as a woman elected representative, I think we have come a long way, and it's a great year to celebrate the 100 years of the first woman being there in the House of Commons. It has not been an easy path for all those women who have paved the way for us to be here today. But like if someone like put some negative comments towards me or something, I have faced those when I was first running back in 2015 as a Muslim woman. I think many people within my community were not accepting that she can be an elected representative for this riding. But like the way to deal with that is that like if someone says something like that, it motivates me even more to do like even work harder to make sure that I can bring that change. I ran in 2015 because I felt at that time that my community was not being well represented. And I think it is important for different communities. It's important for the young girls who wear a hijab to see someone sitting there and representing them. They should not just feel that, okay, like because I wear a hijab, maybe I cannot be here. So it's a land of opportunity, and I think we have to pave way, provide mentorship to our next generations to come.
Thank you, Equal Voice, for this amazing opportunity, and a shout out to all of you who are here today, who want to listen and learn and make a difference. So kudos to you for being here, and particularly the men who have chosen to be here to support us women. I just want to share a personal story to give you some context to my answer. I've had challenges finding myself since birth. I grew up in a family where culturally, I had a lot of double standards up against me. My brother, who was 4 years younger than me, had a lot more privilege than me. And I'm like, what? I fought against that. I graduated in a class this big from computer science, and there were only a handful of women of us who were there to stand up for choosing a career that was different. I was in a corporate boardroom for 15 years and had to put my own voice forward in that boardroom, and it was not easy. So from childhood to a corporate boardroom to just being here today, I would have to say that what I impart on everyone else here is to listen to your voice more and choose each day to keep putting your voice forward each time. And it takes small steps internally to put yourself at the table, to speak up, to be vocal, to stand up for what you believe in. And I encourage all of you just to do that one small thing each day, each time, with the choices you make. And when you do that, we are making a difference collectively. And I have a daughter who's 6. And so when I come home, I have to be able to look at her at 6 years old. And if I tell her, go believe in yourself, love yourself, then I sure as heck have to be able to say that I'm doing that too. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm pleased to be here. Being the first Inuit woman, I can share a lot of the same views that you just heard. Coming from a cultural environment where the male and female have very different roles in our communities, it becomes difficult to feel that you're equal. But I come from a family where my mother was a woman before her time. But my father was also a man before his time, in that he supported my mother, and she was the voice for many women in our communities that were just starting to be involved. I come from a group of people in Canada that were sent off to residential school. Our parents were not consulted. We were not asked what language we wanted our education to be in. And we did not vote in federal elections until the 1960s. And I'm missing my colleague, Ethel Blond and Andrew, who was going to be here also. We come from similar backgrounds. But we had to be the voice for those people who had been silenced by different government policies and just the way the country thought and felt who should represent who. We were always represented by someone else. I don't know what grade I was in, but I was in a classroom where Bud Orange, who was the MP for the North, came into my classroom. And no one had ever said to us, you could be that person. And we were represented by someone who didn't even live in the North. And so my experiences over the years with Inuit gaining a voice, I realized I had to be the voice for all those people who had been silenced by circumstances beyond their control. And so when I was asked to run for the Liberal Party, obviously I said no, and I laughed. And then, as with other people who said, you know, don't answer me now, think about it, talk with your family. And it became an opportunity for me to do all that work that I was trying to do in my community to make our world a better place to live in. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much about representing for your loved ones and your communities. It's truly inspirational. My next question is, how do you think social media today has changed politics? And how can we use social media and harness the good aspects of social media to make positive change?
Maybe I can start on that. These days, social media plays a big role in all the work which we as elected representatives do. And I don't know if many of you know, I was diagnosed with cancer in 2018. It was a stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And I was not wearing a hijab before that. And during that process of my chemo, I think it's my faith and my positive attitude towards that yes, I will get through it, got me through, and I'm thankful to God for giving me a new life. So in that process, I went through a lot of reflections, personal reflections, and as a person of strong faith, I came out wearing a hijab. I was attacked on social media. So I am a very strong believer that women should have the choice what to wear and what not to wear. It is my choice, my personal choice after many reflections that I started wearing a hijab. No one forced me into that situation. I was attacked on social media for wearing a hijab. I think it's really very important that we create awareness, and even on social media, we have to educate those people who attack the elected representatives not knowing what actually it is. So I think as a community, we all need to work towards that to make sure that we stop those negative comments where we are attacked. So I strongly believe that it should be women's right, it should be young girls' right. No one should be scared of wearing a hijab. Like many young women who wear a hijab talk to me about the fears they have. And with many incidents of Islamophobia back in June, we saw the family which was run down with just pure hate in London. So it hit very close to my heart because I'm a person who wears a hijab and goes out for a walk in the evenings. So I think social media can play a positive role in educating everyone to make sure that we don't have to face incidents of Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, anti-black racism. Thank you.
I somehow think, and I said that to someone not long ago, I'm glad I'm not in politics in this social media era. In the olden days, when I was there, if you were really upset about something, you had to go and find a pen, you had to go and find paper, you had to think about how you're going to word it, you had to scratch and then redo, and it would take a day or so. By the time you had the finished product, what you wanted to say on the paper, you gave it a day or two for it to get through the mail, to get to wherever, and then you wait a few days for the individual to read, to do the response, and to get it back to you. Those were the good old days. Now it seems that social media has both sides. It has its really very positive side. As you said, the ability to communicate, to get messages out. At the same time, we know that there is the other side to that, the negative parts of social media. I do a lot of speaking to young women who are interested in politics and interested in putting their names forward. And one of the conversations we have is always around media. And I keep saying, watch what you write, watch what photos you put out there, watch, because it will come back at some time to haunt you. You will regret what you've said, because in the context of your today, wanting to run, wanting to provide leadership, wanting to be out there, those things that you put from your juvenile time, etc., may not hold up and stand up and be the spirit of what you want to say and do. We have gone through, and I think most of you young people here have gone through the last 4 years of the Trump era in the United States. And I'm sure that you too have seen the way the conversations have changed around very sensitive subjects that we thought we had put to bed, how they have somehow sprout and come back and be part of the work that we have to do on a daily basis. This morning's questions around diversity and inclusion and ensuring that in the room we see all the voices and all the not only the voices of white women, but the voices of women of all races and color and culture and sexual orientation, and how the conversations are better as a result of inclusion. And notice I say inclusion and not diversity, because we are diverse. We've always been a diverse Canada, but it's how we include and ensure that that diversity is reflected in every sphere of endeavor. And this is why it's so great to see so many of the young women here from all backgrounds, all races, all culture, hijab and no hijab, all deciding that the political arena is of interest to them. And I think we want to underline that the fact that we come from various places, Nancy. I came from, when I made the decision that yes, I was going to run, I had a really good colleague who said, "You're not a man, you're not a lawyer. What do you know about politics?" And so, you know, we have those things happening in our communities. And social media reflect in a number of instances those negative sentiments. But they were there before. The media, those people who were writing, who would talk about what your hair looked like, the size of your stature, the tone of your voice, your family situation. And Agnes MacPhail, when you go back and you read all of the stuff, all of that nonsense that was said to her, those are still ideas that are circling around. So we've come around 100 years, but there are some things we have not yet put to bed.
Absolutely.
I can speak to two sides of social media as my background is in marketing. So on the not so great side, some of the best advice I received around social media is, one, you don't have to listen to it, because there's a lot of comments that, especially when we're in roles where, you know, there's like a magnifying glass on you, you can choose not to look at it. I personally turn off my phones. It's just a tip in general is, you know, take some time off your phones, turn it off. I think it's really helpful to do that once in a while. And yeah, there's definitely some negative parts of social media, but I really want to focus on the positive, which is that I see social media as a tool. It is a tool to, as they've said, educate and empower and inspire. You can choose your social media platforms to be the voice for what you believe in and to advocate those things. I love it because I get to share the things that I'm passionate about, the things that we're trying to do to make a difference. The positive sides of social media, if you see it as a tool and a way to convey your communication, you can use it to the best of your advantage. So just turn off your phones. You don't necessarily need to leave it on all the time. So take your time away from it. When you do, there's definitely two sides of it.
You might miss something, though, if you turn off the phone.
Yes. Or you can put it on silence, at least, for a little bit.
As with every issue, there are two sides. Yes, there's a lot of negative things that people post on social media. I guess I have to take a little step back and say that when you become an elected person, you're joining a world where the public focus is on you. You do not have a private life as much as you want to. That, for some reason, makes people feel that they have the right to say negative things about you. And yes, as Jean said, I am thankful many times that when I was a member of Parliament for 11 years that we did not have social media. But coming from a part of the country where we are separated by great geography, and as much as I've been told many times with new technology, distance is not a factor, I have to say, yes, it is. I had the largest geographical riding in Canada and probably North America, almost 2 million square kilometers. It took me 3 years to get to every community. And so I can see social media as a way to reach many of those communities and people that I was not physically able to reach in the time that I served. But it also causes people to write things down before they think. So maybe when the time Jean was talking about where you had to write, maybe by the time you wrote that letter, your anger or being upset over an issue has sort of calmed down. You know, they say don't make rash decisions when you're feeling very angry. And I think social media gives that outlet to people who are very upset at the very moment, and they might look at it 2 hours later and realize, okay, I probably shouldn't have said that. But as with everything, there are two sides. It gives a chance for people to be part of the world, like in my communities, that we have a hard time being part of. Because geography is a factor, distance is a factor, and it's very expensive to go to our communities. So we are a part of the population of Canada where we're all constantly trying to make other parts of the country, other Canadians, understand what we're going through. And social media, TikTok, I think it's called, allows, I'm not even on Twitter, so I don't participate in a lot of those platforms, but I know other people do. It gives them a chance to share their world and to make other Canadians understand what we are faced with, and that distance is always a factor. For us to be included, it gives us a platform to share our views and the way we live. And even as a member, and I said earlier, I tried to be the voice for people who were used to being underrepresented and not heard. So we can use this tool as we use any tools that are available to us to make life better. But it also has to be with caution. And I know Kim Campbell was saying, it's attitudes that we fight in our daily lives. If social media can be used to change attitudes, then all the better. But it seems to be very powerful for the negative to win over the positive. So whenever I do post something, and yes, I'm on Facebook, but I take hiatus from that when it gets too much. So I really limit how much I'm on there. But when I do post, I try to post things that are positive and try to encourage people, because in my retired life, that's what I've chosen to do, to try and encourage other people to learn and to do positive things for their community. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much. I know we'll all walk away today with some really great lessons on both the positive and the negative side of social media. But the good old days do sound really good, I won't lie. My next question is, one of my favorite sayings is that if you know yourself and you know your opponent, in 100 battles you'll never peril. At this stage in your lives and your careers, do you feel as though you've developed a full understanding of yourselves? If yes or if no, do you have any advice on how young women today can really work on understanding and knowing themselves to make positive change?
Don't look to the elder for that.
I think it's really very important to believe in yourself. And in that process, you will come through a lot of people who will come out and say it on your face that, okay, maybe you should not do something. My advice to the young girls who are listening and who are sitting here is that have a strong belief in yourself and never let these negative comments deter you from what you want to do. I think the confidence which I got in my life growing up, I have two younger brothers, so I grew up in a family where I didn't have a sister, but I'm very lucky to have a father who really believed in me and provided me equal opportunities what he provided to his two sons. So the confidence which he gave to me, and like, I wish he would have been alive in 2015 to hear that his daughter became member of parliament and would be representing 120,000 people. But he always told me that you can do anything you want, and he promised with me that when I was growing up that he will provide me every opportunity. So as a young unmarried girl from Pakistan, he allowed me to go from Pakistan to UK in 1994 to do my master's, where like even my grandmother was arguing with him that it's time for her to get married and maybe you should not allow her to go to UK and live at her own. But he said no, she wants to study and he will make sure that he provides those opportunities to me. So I think the confidence which I got through him has always guided me. And back in 2014 when I decided to run and I discussed it with my family, I'm very grateful that my husband and my 2 sons strongly believed in me. And like my husband said to me that I am with you, so if you want to do this, you will have my 100% support. So I think we need to educate the men, our fathers, our brothers, our sons, our spouses, to make sure that they provide the support. Because with the work which I have been doing in the last 6 years would not have been possible if my family, my husband and my 2 sons were not there to walk. It's not an easy to be a family of politicians, but I'm very thankful that I had the support of like 6 men in my life, my father, my 2 brothers, my 2 sons and my husband, so to support me there. So it's really very important that we bring men as our partners to do what we want to do in our lives. And believe in yourself and keep on going. Thank you.
What do I say to the young women that I speak to and that I mentor? I have a center in Toronto, the Jean Augustine Center for Young Women's Empowerment. And what do? We talk about leadership. Young girls from age 7 to 17. And we try to develop those young girls, starting very early, with the yes, you can. There is nothing that's non-traditional. Those words no more. There is nothing you cannot do. I grew up hearing that from way before Obama said it. Yes, you can, girl. Yes, you can. My grandmother gave me that affirmation way back. I say to young people, and the young people who are here, you've already decided on a path that you want to go. You know the importance of awareness, of education, of what there is in the society. And I'm sure you can see a path, but you must have the ability to say to yourself on a daily basis, I am going to take a risk. I am going to risk this. There are 2 words that are killer words. Those 2 words are if only. If only I had done this. If only I had said this. If only I had. If only. I say get rid of those 2 words, if only, and just go for it. The other important thing, apart from taking risks, it's also the whole notion of finding mentors. And I think earlier today we heard on this platform, I think it was Kim Campbell who talked about finding people you can talk to, finding people you can ask, how did you do it, having the questions ready. And when I talk about mentor, and as I say, I do quite a bit of that, mentoring, you have to go to the mentor with specific questions that you would want to have answered. It's not a social occasion. It's not an opportunity for fawning, or it's an opportunity to get some answers that would help you to clarify some of the things that you would like to do, that you want to question, that you want to see where the pitfalls might be, what was the experience of the mentor that they can share with you. So when we say get a mentor, have people in your lives who can mentor you and help you along, it's that confidence that those individuals have something to share with you and you take that seriously. The other and most important is to ensure that we have allies. In the old days, we used to call them friends. When I was in 1994, when I was scripting and trying to get the motion for Black History Month in Canada, I started with my friends. I wanted unanimous consent, so you wanted everybody to say yes to the motion. And so I started with my friends. Today, I think you'll call them allies. Who are your allies? Who understands where you want to go, what it is you want to do? Who can speak up for you? Because that's what an ally does. Speak up for you. Make the case after you've put it on the table, can help you to make the case, can speak to the boss, can speak to the manager, can speak to the person in authority on your behalf. And that's an ally. That's a friend. That's someone who is not just in terms of friendship, but someone who understands the cause, the reason why it's important to give you that support. And so as we look at the diverse community of young women who will be, and I said to a couple of them on the outside, I said, what we do is throw the baton to you and you have to catch that baton and run with it. And as you're running, the allies standing on the side are cheering you along. And the mentors are giving you help with that roadmap that can lead you to where you want to go, what your goals will be, so you can reach your full potential.
So sorry to interrupt, but we have two members that need to return to the House of Commons. So we'll be closing off now.
Okay, all right, so I'll wrap it up then. I want to give our most sincere thanks to our incredible panel of firsts. I know you've not only inspired myself and our audience today, but you inspire millions upon millions on a daily basis, and I could not be more thankful. So thank you, and a huge round of applause, please. Perfect. Excellent.
Merci.
Perfect. I'll now hand it over to our hosts to wrap everything up and conclude the day.
Donc, la conférence tire à sa fin. J'espère que vous avez beaucoup aimé, vous avez appris beaucoup de choses. Moi, j'ai extrêmement aimé ce moment que nous avons passé. J'ai appris de chacune des panélistes qui se sont présentées. Elles ont eu chacune une approche différente qu'on a pu apprendre beaucoup. Pour citer quelques citations, donc l'honorable Eleni Bakopanos, elle nous a fait comprendre que être député, ce n'est pas un travail, c'est pas une job, mais c'est une passion. Et aussi, il faut voir la mission à accomplir parce que quand on arrive là, c'est 24 sur 24, 7 jours sur 7, c'est pas facile, mais quand on a la passion, on peut y arriver. Et puis aussi, j'ai Madame l'honorable Augustine qui nous a fait voir que faites attention, nous, notre génération de millénium, Donc, quand on est sur les réseaux sociaux, on écrit beaucoup de choses, mais ça peut nous rattraper plus tard. Donc, des fois, il faut se calmer avant d'écrire, vu que moi, je suis dans cette génération. Et aussi, j'ai Madame Salma qui nous a fait comprendre que j'ai beaucoup aimé. Les femmes, c'est important d'avoir le choix de porter ce qu'on veut sans qu'on ne se sente jugé par rapport à notre tenue vestimentaire. Donc, que chaque femme puisse s'habiller librement comme elle le sent sans se sentir intimidée par quiconque. Donc, moi, ce sont les 3 points que j'ai sortis. Je sais que vous avez appris beaucoup de choses, donc je vais laisser la parole à ma collègue Eleni qui va pouvoir continuer.
Yes, I really enjoyed hearing all the speakers today and all the advice that they imparted with us. I hope that we can all leave here just feeling inspired and empowered with those words. And so I want to also thank all of you, our fabulous speakers and our moderators, Bibi, Amen, Ampai, and all the DOV delegates who shared their amazing projects out in the foyer. Let's give them all a round of applause, please. We'd also like to thank the Government of Canada for making this day possible, and to all the volunteers and staff working at Equal Voice. And lastly, thank you all for joining us today, either in person or from home. It is important to take the time to pause and reflect on what today represents. And we thank you for joining us to share a space to honor some of the women who have paved the way forward for a more inclusive parliament. And 100 years is, of course, a milestone, but it also represents a collective responsibility to shape the next 100 years. We hope that everyone listening today will run for office or support candidates who have put their hand up for any level of government. Join or volunteer for a political party, boards, community groups. Vote, advocate, and support those leading initiatives like the DOV delegates. And lastly, get involved in organizations working towards a greater diversity in politics, like ours and all those listed on the screen.
Je vous remercie tous de vous être joints à nous aujourd'hui, en personne ou depuis chez vous. Il est important de prendre le temps de s'arrêter et de réfléchir à ce que représente cette journée. Et nous vous remercions de vous joindre à nous pour partager un espace pour honorer les femmes qui ont ouvert la voie pour un gouvernement plus inclusif. Le centenaire est une étape importante, mais il représente aussi un appel collectif à l'action. Nous avons tous la responsabilité de façonner les 100 prochaines années en se présentant aux élections ou soutenir des candidats qui se sont portés candidats à tous les niveaux du gouvernement, adhérer au fait du bénévolat pour un parti politique, un conseil d'administration ou un groupe communautaire, voter, défendez vos intérêts. Enfin, participer à des organisations qui œuvrent pour une plus grande diversité en politique, comme la nôtre et toutes celles qui figurent à l'écran.
And today we're thrilled to have Toronto-based recording artist Akila with us today to conclude our event. Unfortunately, due to music copyright laws, we will now have to say goodbye to our guests watching over live stream. So thank you for joining us today.
Nous sommes ravis aujourd'hui d'accueillir l'artiste torontoise Akila pour conclure notre événement. Malheureusement, en raison des lois sur les droits de l'auteur et de la musique, nous ne pourrions pas le visionner en ligne. Donc, merci à tous de nous avoir joints virtuellement aujourd'hui.
Today's entertainment is sponsored by TikTok.